I worked on the Van Buren project probably for about 3 or 4 years. Well, Van Buren was Black Isle's attempt at making the Fallout 3 game. There were 2 stages of that process. There was a concept period of Van Buren that lasted for the 3 or 4 years that I was working on it. When I left Interplay and became one of the founders of Obsidian, the staff that remained at Black Isle continued on Van Buren for I think about 8 months to a year. I'm not sure of the exact time frame there. When I was working on it, the goals of that title were I had always recognized that the biggest group of adversaries that you're likely to face that have the chance to really mess up the world is another player adventuring party. So part of the focus for Van Buren was I wanted the player to have a series of rivals in the game that weren't necessarily an enemy. They were someone you were competing against with different goals. They weren't necessarily evil. What they were is they just had a different agenda than you, and you were into conflict with them over the course of the game. Also, there were a lot of cool elements that I'd always loved about Fallout, and I wanted to expand upon in Van Buren, and some of those design documents are still floating up on the internet. There are still some references to Van Buren in terms of like names of various organizations you encounter in New Vegas, like Caesar's Legion, for example, came out of one of our pen and paper gaming sessions that was done for Van Buren while I was doing that production work. All that stuff, you'll see little trademarks of that in New Vegas, but the context is much different than their original conception. My favorite thing in New Vegas, there's actually, I guess it's sort of a high-level thing that I really like about it. One is I like the fact that New Vegas has no evil bad guy. What they do is it sort of puts the player into a situation, and then the player decides what faction they believe in based on their philosophy and the actual repercussions of their philosophy in the environment. Like, for example, NCR, very democratic, seem like the good guys, but when you go around the wasteland, you sort of see all the after effects of what they're trying to do, and it sort of makes you question whether they're really the right thing for the wasteland or not. Basically, it puts the player in a situation, you see these factions, you see the beliefs, you see the results of their beliefs, and then we allow you to make the choice of who you ally with, or if you don't want to ally with any of them at all, and I think that puts the player in a really interesting situation. So I worked on Fallout 2, and I designed a location called New Reno as one of the areas in Fallout 2. What I learned from that experience is that what you want to do when you're designing areas for the campaigns like Fallout is you want to make sure that no matter what the character build or how they've constructed their character, you want the actual environment to react to it, and you also want to make sure there's plenty of quests and ways to solve those quests that complement your character's build. So I guess in terms of the New Reno design, we actually try to make sure those elements are present in the area designs for Fallout New Vegas. In terms of dialogue systems for role-playing games, I've often found that the way you want to design your dialogue system depends very much on the franchise. Like, all the mechanics associated with a Star Wars dialogue system, for example, very much has to incorporate light side and dark side elements into that conversation, and the morality and threading that conversation has to be very light side and dark side, because that's the nature of the campaign setting, that's the nature of the universe. With Fallout, it's very much of an interrogation tree style dialogue, and that dates all the way back to Fallout 1, and it's more of what your character mechanics brings to the dialogue in terms of speech and intelligence and charisma that causes those cool changes and reactivity in the conversation. So I guess the system sort of depends on what you're trying to accomplish with a franchise. So for example, like when we were doing Alpha Protocol, for example, we wanted very much the real-time conversation system because that felt more urgent. It felt more like you were in episode of 24, and we felt that conversation system complemented the actual genre of game you're trying to make. So that's kind of the goal when you design a dialogue system.
Was Van Buren named after the mustache or the president?
The president. Van Buren was named after the president.